welcome to Coffee and Hardtack, a digital program with the Civil War Museum in Kenosha, Wisconsin. My name is Jenn Edginton. I'm Curator of Social Studies Education here at the Kenosha Museum campus. And with me, as always, is Doug Dammann, Manager of Education Programs and also Curator of the Civil War Museum. And we're really excited for today's guest. We are joined by Dennis Frye, so we're going to learn a little bit more about him.
Well, first of all, hi guys. First of all, I love the title of your program. I mean, I've been doing programs for over 40 years as a public historian, and I've never done a program with this title. So congratulations, very creative and absolutely appropriate for the Civil War. Well done. I had the great privilege of serving as the chief historian at Harpers Ferry National Historical Park, one of the national park units of nearly 320 units within the national park system. Harpers Ferry is located in 3 states, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia, the national park boundaries in 3 states. We have 2 rivers there, the Potomac River and the Shenandoah River, which come together in the mountains of the Blue Ridge and actually carve their way through the Blue Ridge. And we're about a little more than 60 miles northwest of the capital via the Potomac River. I grew up in this area. I grew up only about 4 miles from Harpers Ferry, so I'm a native of this area in Maryland, not West Virginia, but have went to school here also at a very, very wonderful college at the time called Shepherd College, a history major, and I've had a great career in public history. And one other thing I'll mention is that I did leave the Park Service and work in the private sector for about 10 years. And during that time, I had the great privilege of serving as president of what is today referred to as the American Battlefield Trust. And I'm one of the original co-founders of that organization, way back now in 1987. I also had the privilege of co-founding an organization very close to my heart because I also live very near the Antietam battlefield today. In fact, my home is an 1840s home that I restored. It was General Ambrose Burnside's headquarters right after Antietam. President Lincoln conferred with Burnside in my house. The President of the United States was in my house. Every morning when I walk on the original floorboards on the first floor, I know Lincoln was there. So as a historian, it's a dream. You're living in a place that is, well, it's you can't describe it. You can feel it. You can only feel it. And so one of the other organizations I had the privilege of co-founding and serving as president was the Save Historic Antietam Foundation. And Save Historic Antietam Foundation has been an extremely successful local organization in helping to preserve the great Antietam National Battlefield.
Great. During your career at Harpers Ferry, what changes had you seen or been a part of in terms of the interpretation of John Brown? Because I think today we're going to kind of focus on John Brown's story.
Well, it's a great subject. It's a wonderful topic. You know, I loved talking about John Brown, and I can tell you why. Controversy. Controversy. We had literally millions of people come to Harpers Ferry during my more than three decades working there and 2 decades as chief historian. Millions of people. One thing that most of those people came in which they had something in common were 2 words: John Brown. Brown is known. Brown's been dead since 1859. So, you know what, 161 years now. But he's not dead. He is so much alive. That song, John Brown's Body, His Soul Goes Marching On, is very true. But it's true for many different reasons. And people come to Harpers Ferry with many different opinions. And I want to emphasize the word opinions of Brown. And this is what makes him interesting. This is what makes him so worthy of conversation, why we're talking about him today, is he's very controversial. So I love doing a John Brown tour for the general public because I knew my audience was engaged as a park ranger before I said a word. They wanted to do most of the talking rather than me.
Yes,
in terms of change, let me just mention in terms of changes. I don't think I've seen much change. Brown has been revered as a hero, and he was 40 years ago. And Brown has been labeled a terrorist, as he was 40 years ago. And that's still how he's seen. There seems to be no in between on John Brown. It's one extreme or the other. And people were very willing to tell me what they thought of John Brown. They wanted me to know, this is what I think of him. And they weren't bashful about it. People were not bashful about talking about this person. So I really don't think that we've seen a whole lot of change in terms of how he's been viewed. Maybe more change in terms of how people express themselves with regard to how he's viewed. More forcibly today than they would have.
Dennis, I can remember about 4 or 5 years ago, we did a tour. The museum brought a group out to Antietam and Harpers Ferry, and we had the privilege of having you lead it. And we were in the fire engine house, and you mentioned to the group, people don't have an opinion about John Brown, they feel John Brown. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, we think of opinion as a mind activity, that when we think about something, we have an opinion about something. But opinion is much more than the mind. Opinion is usually what you're feeling. Opinion is not necessarily an intellectual process. Most of the time it's not. It's what you feel, and then you express what you feel. It may have absolutely no basis. But if this is what you feel, it becomes your opinion when you express it. And so people feel Brown. There's an emotional response to John Brown. And it's one that sometimes can be a response of reverence, or it can be a response of hatred. And you look at people and you say, now you're a human being and you're a human being and you're breathing and you're breathing, and we're talking about the same person, and you two people are on different ends of the planet with regard to how you feel about this one person. So it really is all about an expression of feeling, Doug. It really is not an intellectual exercise. It's not a mind exercise. And I might mention that a lot of what people feel about Brown is taught, literally taught. For example, the way people feel about Brown in the South is probably, forget the word probably, is absolutely different than the way people feel about Brown in the North. Well, why is this? And it really focuses on cultural differences and the way that he is perceived through these different cultures and the way that he's taught. And so, again, people then internalize this, and it becomes opinion, but it's really an expression of feeling.
Interesting. Yeah, he seems like he's kind of more of a feelings-based, you either like him or you don't, and it's not really based on as much fact as a feeling or an opinion, like you're saying. Absolutely.
It's not a cerebral, thought out process. People have this innate feeling about Brown, and much of it is based on the culture that they're comfortable with, that they were raised in, that they know. And so we get these vast differences of opinion. And often it's based on the region that you grew up in.
Sure. I grew up in the North, so I can see that.
I bet you have an opinion on Brown.
I do. So we have a question, because coming up very quickly is a depiction of John Brown that's going to be on TV with Good Lord Bird. So a fictional John Brown has been portrayed in various movies and miniseries and in books, and including this upcoming Good Lord Bird interpretation from the book that will be on TV. So have you seen a change in kind of how Brown has been depicted through time, because going back from earlier movies, earlier books into more modern?
Well, I think one thing that has changed with respect to Brown and how he's viewed in the public arena, and of course what we're talking about is public adaptations of John Brown, whether it be fictional or even looking at what we I'll put in quotation marks, historical truth, because historical truth is another whole discussion we can have. But Brown for a long time was just seen as a crazy man. He's just nuts. Even if you revered him, you could still say he was crazy. And of course, if you couldn't stand him, you could say the man was crazy. I think there's been a change there. I think now that people see purpose in Brown. It's doesn't this crazed lunatic, but they see now that indeed he had purpose, and it was intentional, and it was contrived, and it was considered, and it was conspiratorial. All these things now are the way I think Brown is viewed, not just in academia, but more so along the lines of the public. People still can say that he's crazy, but they see it now with intention and purpose, much more so than they have in the past. They don't just dismiss Brown as a lunatic. They see him as a transformative figure in American history. This is a real change in terms of how Brown has been approached by public interpretation.
And Dennis, to that end, how do you see John Brown as still being relevant in today's political and social climate?
Well, it's hard to find a person more relevant. Brown was a protester. He was a protester. He was an abolitionist. But Brown was unusual as an abolitionist in two regards. One, Brown truly believed in the antebellum period in equal rights, that the African American was equal to the white American. Now that was virtually unknown, unheard of. Most abolitionists didn't believe in equality. They wanted to end slavery, but they weren't willing to go to the step of, well, you are equal to me. Not most abolitionists. So Brown differentiates himself in that regard. Another way that he differs himself as a protester. Brown absolutely embraced and endorsed violence. He was so convinced that the nation's law was so corrupt with regard to enslavement. And in fact, he was convinced, not because of personal disgust with the law, but by Supreme Court ruling. When the United States Supreme Court in 1857 does the famous Dred Scott decision, basically that decision, you can boil that decision down to this, that the African American slave is not a human being. You're not a human being. Oh yes, you breathe and you talk and you eat and you walk, but you're not a human being. You are a piece of property. That is the law of the land at a Supreme Court decision. Our Supreme Court. And so Brown at that point just said, okay, this is impossible. I'm not going to get the Congress to change anything. We're not going to put anybody in the White House that's going to change anything. And now the Supreme Court says it's hopeless, that the final word is, you are not a human being. You are property. So he felt that the only way to overcome slavery through his form of protest was violence. Now, he wasn't Nat Turner. Brown's idea of violence was, I'm not going to go into the South and create an uprising where the principal purpose is to kill slave owners, but don't dare stand in my way. Do not stop me. If I want to go south into Virginia and I want to free slaves, I will do that. And if you try to stop me, halt me in any way, I will use violence against you. And so again, it was this violence with, I'm not talking about justified violence. I'm talking about violence with intent. His intent is, I'm going to free people. I'm going to end slavery. Don't try to stop me, because if you do, I will use violence against you.
That's so interesting. That was really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that more people, this is 100% correct, that John Brown is resonating with a lot of people currently. And so if people want to learn more about John Brown, about what he did and his philosophies, his life, his legacy, do you have any recommendations of books or anything for further research?
Well, you can be very academic about John Brown, or you can be very poetic about
Sure.
Brown. Without doubt, the most famous poem is written by Stephen Vincent Benet, John Brown's Body. And it is a wonderful, wonderful poem that goes on. It's a whole book of poetry. And it's not just about Brown, it's about the Civil War, the lead up to the war, Brown, and then the war itself. And so if you would like to learn about that period of our history through a poet's perspective and feel the rhythm of our language, of English, in this beautiful written poetic verse, John Brown's Body by Stephen Vincent Benet is absolutely wonderful. It's not fact. It's designed to make you feel history. And you can't understand American history by feeling it. I must admit, my favorite Brown book was written a long time ago. It was written in 1909, but it's not hard to get a hold of. This book was written on the 50th anniversary of the John Brown raid at Harpers Ferry, and the author is Villard, Villard, and it's a biography. It's a biography of John Brown. And what I love about Villard is it is the best book with regard to primary sources. Villard knew people who actually participated with Brown, knew Brown. He and others interviewed people associated with Brown. So yes, a half a century has passed, but they've gathered information, they've gathered intelligence. And his archives, his personal archives that he put together over several decades of bringing together information on Brown is enormous, perhaps the best in the country on Brown. So if you really want to enjoy an early biography, but very thorough, that is just replete with primary source information, Oswald Garrison Villard, John Brown, a biography 50 years later, is a phenomenal piece of work.
You know, I would also recommend to all of our viewers out there who've never been to Harpers Ferry, you have to go and you have to walk and retrace the footsteps, maybe even visit the Kennedy farmhouse in Maryland and think about the march to the ferry, as Brown called it that evening. Experience that history, go into the fire engine house. There's so much history in Harpers Ferry, but for me personally, it's also one of the most beautiful places that I've ever seen. When you stand at Jefferson's Rock and you see the two rivers come together, it's amazing. It's a spiritual experience to get to do that. And
spiritual is the word. You got it, Doug. I mean, most of your viewers don't know you lived in Harpers Ferry for a few months when you worked there as an intern, as a very young man. But spiritual is the word.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about Harpers Ferry is there's so much interesting history. You have the John Brown story. You have so much Civil War history going on within the town and the surrounding states. You've got so much African-American history there with Storer College and the Niagara movement and the beginning of the NAACP. And then not only that, but just the physical beauty and the rivers and the natural world around it that you can go and hike and enjoy. So if people are making a pilgrimage or making a trip out to the DC, Gettysburg, Antietam battlefield area, your trip is not complete without stopping at Harpers Ferry for at least a full day. Plan on a full day of being there and take comfortable shoes because you will be doing a lot of walking, but you'll get good exercise.
It's you know, every day I came to work at Harpers Ferry, I never came to work.
It's lucky when you have a career like that.
Dennis, thank you so much.
It was just, I want to thank all of your viewers because truly I worked for you. I worked for the American people. I truly represented a public servant. I took public service very seriously. Public service doesn't pay a lot of money, and you know, I don't care because the fulfillment that comes from public service, there's no value that you can place on that. and there's no value you can place on a place like Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. It changed us. It changed all of us. It changed all of your listeners. It transformed this country, and I don't use the word transform lightly. It truly transformed who we were as a nation. And Harpers Ferry tells many transformative stories in one small place nestled between the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers.
Absolutely. I know I have to get back there, but thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
We really, really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us, and thanks to everybody for watching. We'll see you soon.